Um, so I went to Afghanistan for a number of reasons. Um, and actually that starts when I went to Iraq. I had a lot of things going on in my life, and I had been working directly with the military for about 5 or 6 years, doing IT, and I guess I was inspired by some of my colleagues that were military. When I 2P'd out of the Ministry of Defence to a private company that was running a project in Iraq, my personal life was, let's say, in flux. I took the opportunity to both do something good and to change what I was doing. So I volunteered to go to Iraq in 2008, and I stayed there for 2 tours, well into 2009. When I finished in Iraq and Kuwait as part of Rockdale, the opportunity came up to go to Afghanistan. So that's how I ended up in Afghanistan. So the company provide training, and over the times that I went to both war zones, there was a number of training things. So there's a thing called a condo course. Now, a number of companies run condo courses. It's contractor on deployment. Everybody who's civilian, from Ministry of Defence civilians to people contracted like me who do that, to journalists, go through this training. So my first one was very interesting. It covered things like making weapons safe. So they had lots of examples of weapons, from AK-47s to M16s, M4 carbines, hand weapons, Glocks, things like that, to give you a hands-on experience of what to do with those to make them safe, because obviously they're not going to train you to fire them, but they want to make them safe. Then they went into IEDs, improvised explosive devices, where the common construction of those, the components, how they were set, what triggered them, how they were triggered, what sort of person was going to trigger them. They went through kidnap scenarios, travelling in convoys, how to drive. They went into how to, if you had been ambushed, what to do, where to go, who was in charge in those scenarios, who was second in charge in those scenarios, how to move from one vehicle to another, and probably most importantly, first aid. So unlike in standard first aid, where you're checking pulses and airways and things like that, the first thing you actually do in a combat zone is check for holes, because obviously what you don't want to do is have someone pump all their blood out as you're pushing their chest and they bleed out. That's not a good thing to do. So check for holes, patching holes, shoving stuff in it, making sure they don't bleed out, and then going through and doing the normal first aid stuff. In Afghanistan, I went twice for 2 specific jobs. The first one was to upgrade a piece of software that was being used by the military for a thing called a 9-liner. What a 9-liner is a set of situational statements that go through what has happened, when it happened, who is involved, and that sort of thing. Now, from my point of view, that was either someone was being shot at, someone had been shot, but if someone was being shot at, 9-liners would come up, and of course that was a response. So helicopters would go out and they'd get top cover and things like that. From my point of view, the thing that I was concentrating on, because I'd done, before I went, I did a load of work at Headley Court and Selly Oak to upgrade their computers and actually get it so that the casualties coming in were properly looked after all the way from both Iraq and Afghanistan to back to the UK. And this was like the beginning, the start part of that. So those 9-liners that came out on the system that I upgraded, obviously I concentrated on the casualty evacuation stuff. But when I did the software upgrade, it took about 15 minutes off of the golden hour, as it's called, which is basically if you can get someone back to help in an operating theatre, that sort of thing, within an hour, then their probability of survival goes up exponentially. So reducing the response time by 15 minutes actually did make a big difference to lives in Afghanistan. Well, that's a difficult question to answer, really. I've got lots of vivid memories of Afghanistan. How beautiful the place is, the mountains, the stars, the gardens. I mean, the gardens in Lashkar are absolutely gorgeous. At night, the stars they seem a lot closer than they are here, a lot brighter. There's a lot more of them because there's hardly any light pollution, really. Even in the major cities, that's like being in a little village. The view actually from when you leave the place at night. So I flew at night out of Lashkar and Goresh. Goresh is a very small place, but how it's lit, just where the stuff are, and I mean the view out the side of the Sea King as I left Lashkar, it just looked like a beautiful place. It was really interesting. I got to go to the air traffic control tower at Bastion, and actually got up onto the roof, and the view of the mountains from there was incredible. You know, because it's you don't spend much time in deserts really, and it's surprising how flat they are. But of course, Afghanistan's a very mountainous area, so being able to get that view, to be able to see the sunset there, yeah, that was really interesting. And then of course, the other memories that you have are the scary ones. So I'd say probably my scariest one was there was an incident in 2011 where 5 military people were killed by someone in the A&P that they were training. So the guy would have been with them for a long time, but somehow he'd been subverted, and he killed everyone in the department there that he'd been working with for quite a long time. That night, I spent the night in a transit tent with 20 Afghan soldiers. The fact that there was 20 Afghan soldiers, all of which were obviously battle hardened, were tooled up. They all had knives, considerable knives. Their weapons were checked in, their guns, but of course, you know never know what's going on. And there's me and another guy and 2 American soldiers who were very soft targets inside a place that any of them could have done. You know, they could have slit our throats in our sleep, and to be honest, no one would have known. That's something that sticks in my mind. I don't think I've ever been quite so scared. My actual first flight in Afghanistan was very interesting because basically I'd got there, I was about a day and a half in, and I was going to go out to Lashkar, got on a Chinook, and it sort of hopped around the place, picking up supplies and post and things like that. Its last drop was picking up a Taliban combatant or 2 actually. They were led on. They were bound with tie wraps, blindfolded, but they were wearing body armour and all sorts of stuff. Because obviously you've got to keep everybody safe when you're flying, because they did like shooting at Chinooks. And yeah, so the guy there just sat next to me. So literally, you know, sort of like you're sat next to someone on a bus. They're a bit stinky, to be honest. But yeah, you know, and all when they brought their personal effects in as well. I mean, that was knives and AK-47s and things like that. You know. But that obviously sticks with me as well. Yeah, sure. So obviously, I you know, in my time, I visited Iraq, and I spent most of my time in Basra. I went to Kuwait, where I went to a couple of bases, but I spent most of my time in Kuwait at a place called Camp Bastion, which is in the north of it, which was an American air base. When I went to Afghanistan, obviously, there's a number of hops that you have to do to get there. So I went to Al Udeid, I went to somewhere in the UAE, which I don't really know where it was. I went to Cyprus on the way out and on the way back a number of times. But obviously I spent a lot of time in Camp Bastion and Lashkar, Goreshk and Kandahar. So yeah, I got about a bit really, all flying around in Chinooks. And for my time there, obviously I got some medals. I've been awarded 3 medals. I've got the Optelic medal for my time in Iraq and Kuwait, and I have the Operational Service medal with the Afghan clasp for my time in Afghanistan, and the NATO non-Article 5 Afghanistan, the ISAF medal as well.